Welcome, everyone. My name is Nic Suzor. I'm an Associate Professor here in the law school, working with Professor Matt Rimmer and others on open access, open education, and lots of other open publishing initiatives. We're really delighted to be able to host this event today, which will be in really two parts. So the first session, I'm really happy to have Robin Wright and Karina Bosu with us for the day, who are going to showcase the work that they've just been wrapping up on a Office of Learning and Teaching funded research project about open education, and they've developed a really promising and useful set of resources that they will spend some time walking you through to help guide decisions about open education publishing, licensing and publishing. Before we get to that, I wanted to have a little bit of time to talk to you all about the future of the Creative Commons global network. We run Creative Commons Australia here at QUT in conjunction with some partners elsewhere in Australia. And we've run this project here for about 15 years, but there's a lot of interesting and exciting changes in the network over the next few months that I want to share with all of you and extend you an invitation to become involved with that work. And then we're going to break for lunch and have a second session this afternoon, about midday, where we will have a research panel particularly with Associate Professor Lucy Montgomery will also join us, and Dr. Ginny Barber, really to think about these types of questions in a much broader context, the future of publishing, not just scholarly publishing, but the sorts of lessons we might learn from scholarly publishing as we extend to publishing or as other publishing industries adapt to digital disruption and seek to find new models that work to maximize the benefit and value of their works and provide sustainable revenue streams for their authors and publishers. So Lucy Montgomery in particular will give a quick presentation on Knowledge Unlatched, which has just in the last few days announced another large offering of research monographs, and I'm very excited to hear about that. And then we'll move to a panel session. We have advertised this event, that panel discussion separately, so we hope that more people who have a broader interest in publishing and transformation in publishing might be able to join us from around 11:30 or 12 o'clock. So the first thing I wanted to do is really talk about Creative Commons. So let me just find my slides, sorry. And I won't spend too much time on this, but I'm going to assume that everyone here is at least somewhat familiar with Creative Commons and what it seeks to do. We, as I said, at QUT have been one of the institutional leads. Myself and Professor Tom Cochrane here have led QUT, I've been the lead of QUT for the last few years, but Tom Cochrane has been one of the foundational leads of QUT of Creative Commons Australia over the last close to 13 years now. So a very long-standing commitment here to the work of the Creative Commons Global Network. Now, we are now at the 15-year mark of Creative Commons globally, and this provides a really interesting opportunity to rethink how we progress in the future and how we do the work of progressing a global commons into the future. Most of you may be familiar with Creative Commons as really a series of licenses. And this is the way the network has historically been set up to do this type of work. We have 80 affiliate teams or so around the world whose main job over the last 15 years has been to port the Creative Commons licenses from a US-specific legal code to national legal code. So we put in a lot of effort to develop the translations of these licenses that we were certain would work in Australia. And that was a big part of the first phase of the Creative Commons movement. After that work was done, we moved into another phase of advocacy and policy work to really try to support the use of Creative Commons resources across the different sectors in which we're engaged, but also to work to influence policy to develop better government and institutional policy that would maximise the value of creative resources and the distribution of creative resources where possible. It's become apparent to us over the last few years that the setup that we have for the Creative Commons Global Network is no longer really appropriate for where we want to go next. And this is where I'm really quite excited about the opportunities here, that for the last year we have been engaged in a fairly intensive strategy consultation of some of the most active affiliate teams from around the world to try to work out how we might grow the Creative Commons Global Network and how we might be a lot more open in our activities. So to think about the other activities that Creative Commons does, and what I would like all of you to, I'd like to invite everyone here to think about how the activities of how your work or your institution's work might fit within some of the broader umbrellas of the work of the Creative Commons Global Network. And if it does fit, then I want to ask you to really participate in this strategic consultation process to help us understand what we can do to get you more involved in the Creative Commons Global Network. So the fundamental goal here is to radically open the Creative Commons Network. We have preached openness in the delivery of content, but the structures that we have used to govern the network have so far been a little bit too rigid to allow other people to get involved easily and to really contribute to the work of the Commons. So just thinking about the sorts of things that we do here at Creative Commons Australia, we really have four or five main sets of subject matter focus. Today we're going to hear a lot about open educational resources. A lot of this day is organised by Jess Stevens, who is here, who is a member of our Creative Commons affiliate team, was previously the copyright officer here for last year here at QUT, and is a researcher in our IP and innovation law program, looking at how we start to deliver new publishing models for open access or open educational publishing in particular. So a lot of this discussion is really designed to start thinking about the hard research questions that are ahead of us in terms of how do we actually affect transformation in publishing industries, particularly in open education resources, but across other industries as well, and where are we going to go in the future? So a lot of our focus here at Creative Commons Australia is on policies for open educational resources at an institutional level, but also working with, hopefully with other people who are interested in working in this area, who are already doing a lot of work in this area in Australia, to think about public policy and how we maximise the value and benefits of educational resources. We do a lot of work on open access and working particularly here at QUT with the Australasian Open Access Strategy Group, led by Dr. Ginny Barber, who is here today. Our research work at Creative Commons Australia focuses primarily on questions of impact of open access and trying to think about how we start to measure the benefits of open access publishing and what that means, again, for public policy and institutional policy. But we also do, where we can, where we're resourced to, support work across the sector, working with educational institutions and scholars to work through some of the hard practical questions around open access publishing. And we're very fortunate to have the AOASG based here as well, and we collaborate heavily there. Our third set of research streams, or activity streams, are around the GLAM sector more generally, galleries, libraries, archives and museums, where we do a lot of work to try to support digitisation and accessibility efforts. This is an area that's been quite challenging in the past, mainly because of resource constraints around the sector, but also thinking about some of the really difficult copyright questions that do need a lot of legislative reform before we can realize the value of digitization and accessibility that technological change has provided to us. So a lot of our work is working with institutions and peak bodies like the Australian Digital Alliance and other groups to work with cultural and public sector institutions on copyright policy and on digitization and accessibility practice, archival and so on. And the fourth and final area that I'll talk about today, the fourth area, is really both open data and open access to public sector information. For a long time, we've worked with Ozgol, which was previously a member of Creative Commons Australia, led by Baden Appleyard, to provide support to public sector users of information and public sector licenses of information. So working with government departments to provide the support they need to unlock the resources that Australian taxpayers pay for in the creation, to make sure that we maximise the value of that spend and to maximise the ability for people to build on public sector information, open data to deliver new and interesting outputs. Finally, we are starting to do more work with the creative sector, and this is somewhere, I guess, one of the biggest challenges for the Creative Commons project in Australia is that we haven't been as successful as we would like in supporting the needs of Australian artists. So we now have a set of projects led particularly by Dr. Carly Pappalardo, and Jeff Stevens also involved, in really thinking about the barriers that creative people face in negotiating copyright, in clearing licenses and being able to engage in their practice, and thinking about what we might be able to do to assist smoother and lower transaction costs. Licensing, but also thinking about where are the futures of sustainable creative business models that enables a flourishing cultural and creative sector in Australia. So a lot of our work is really focused in these 5 areas, but we are a small team. We have some great people here, we have some great people in New South Wales, but ultimately there's a lot of work to be done, and we only have a fairly limited set of resources that we're able to dedicate from our institution. So what I really want to talk about today in the next 5 minutes is how we might restructure to better achieve this mission. The mission of the Creative Commons Global Network, as you can see here, is to build a global commons of creativity and knowledge and grow a movement that advocates, promotes, and enables openness and sharing around the world. And even from the quick overview of the activities we're engaged in at Creative Commons Australia, it's fairly obvious that there's a lot to do here that we're unable to really resource. And so I'm asking here for each of you, if you are interested in helping on this mission to improve the landscape and improve the architecture and infrastructure for creativity and the flow of creative information and expression, then I'd like to have a more detailed conversation about what we can do to actually get you involved. And this is part of, as I said, a global network strategy consultation that will quite fundamentally transform the Creative Commons network. I've spoken a bit about how our existing structures were rigid, and a lot of this information is really mainly designed for people inside the network as part of our consultation process. There's a lot of technical detail here that I'm going to skip over, but I'm happy to talk about at more length. But I really want to talk about the future. And the future is moving from a network that really is quite successful at delivering licenses and support around licenses, and has been quite successful in doing a lot of advocacy as well, but to a movement that better achieves that much broader social mission as a global movement of people who care about the flow of information and access to information. And so across the network, there's a really strong desire to work on shared projects and shared goals, but we don't have the structure necessarily to support collaboration in a way that is really useful. There are a lot of people here in Australia that are working on many of the activities that I've just outlined, but we don't have extremely good infrastructure and processes to enable coordination of efforts. And this is what I really want to get from this session, to hear from you, maybe in the break or follow up by email or feed directly into the consultation process, is about what would have to change. So we have proposed a new governance and decision-making model. Myself and Delia Brown from the Creative Commons Australia affiliate spent a lot of time last year with 15 other affiliate members around the world to provide a sketch of what a new model might look like for the Creative Commons network. And so we have made some fundamental changes to membership. We are proposing to do away with formal affiliation with the Creative Commons Global Network. So at the moment, QUT is one of the affiliate members that essentially forms the Creative Commons Australia organisation. And we want to do away with that very formal association in order to become much more open in the way that we collaborate with others. And so the changes we've made, or we've suggested to be made and will be hopefully ratified after the consultation in mid-March, that we will now allow any individual contributor to the Creative Commons mission to join the global network. And joining provides quite an important role in participating in the governance of the network, in setting global strategy and directing resources for how we will achieve those strategies, to support teams from around the world to further the goals of the movement. We're still open to organisational members that organisations can join as partners, but only individuals will have voting rights in this new system. We'll create a new body, a new governance body called the Global Network Council that is representative of people working in the Creative Commons network around the world. And this body will be responsible for strategy and for stewardship of the licenses. So the core function of the Network Council is really to define how people can work together and to allocate resources to support that work. The work itself will be done by anyone who wants to contribute. So this isn't the official word, but we will become a duocracy here, that we will be led by the people who have resources to contribute to the work of the Creative Commons network. And that means that both at a national and regional level, and also at an international level, we will develop consensus-based systems to help people get involved and provide them with the support they need to further their aims. We will still have a country team, a Creative Commons Australia, but that country team will be much more open. So I will invite people who are interested in joining the Creative Commons network to join our country team, and we will then develop our own Australian consensus-based positions on the type of work that we do, the policy advocacy that we do, the outreach and support work that we do. Will all be coordinated through a new, much larger Australian Creative Commons organisation. We'll then have representation at the global level on the Global Network Council. So that's a very brief overview of quite a complex shift in the network. I don't want to bog you down in too many more details about what that might look like, but if you are interested, I do encourage you to read the blog posts on the Creative Commons blog, the longer consultation document on consultation.creativecommons.org, and either feed your comments, questions, queries directly to me or Delia Brown in Australia. Email addresses there, or using the comments submission function on the consultation website. We have only a few more weeks to do this. We're meeting as a network at the Creative Commons Summit in Toronto at the end of March, where we will consider, end of April. I'm getting ahead of myself. Fortunately, this year's gone quick enough already. We will meet at the end of April. Consultation closes at the end of March to give us, on the strategy committee, time to take in all of the comments and suggestions and to clarify and modify the plan in preparation for adoption at the Global Summit in April, at the end of April. So you've got 3 weeks or so. I really do encourage you, take this opportunity. We want to hear from you. We've provided a view from inside the network about how we think we might reach out. What I'm looking for here today is a view from people who might like to join us, but don't really know how, or don't know how they might contribute, or are unclear of what this sort of work even means. So I really encourage you, please drop me an email, and I'm happy to sit down with you and talk to you about the plan. If you're interested in getting involved, please drop your comments in the consultation document. If you can, that would be extremely helpful. And we look forward to hearing from you. But it's a really exciting time, I think, to step back and rethink how we might do open advocacy and support open movements in Australia in a much more coordinated way. So far, a lot of us have been working somewhat in, I won't say complete isolation, but in somewhat disparate attempts. And I would like to do a lot more work across the sector in Australia to make sure that we can collaborate efficiently and effectively. Thank you. Does anyone have any quick questions or clarifications that we can go into now? Otherwise, I'll move straight into the next session. So the question is whether there are specific proposals for Australia. The answer is no, there's only one global proposal that we have to make work for everyone. And this is where I'm really keen to hear people from Australia look at the proposal and see whether it will work in the Australian context. And if it won't, if there are challenges that we need to address, then we need to make sure that it's tailored so that it will. Okay. So thank you for indulging me. I thought that this was a great audience to provide this update. But the main work of today is the opportunity to hear about the results of this open education licensing research project and the toolkit that's been produced. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to, through their generous support, we've been able to have Robin Wright and Karina Bosu here to walk us through some of the outcomes of the project. I'm going to hand over to them for about the next hour. We hope to have quite an hour and a quarter, and hope to have quite an interactive session. I encourage you to really take this opportunity to ask questions and get clarification. This is, from my perspective, a really fantastic resource for supporting the actual work of open education licensing. So I am really pleased to be able to dedicate the time to learn about it here today. And so without hearing any more from me, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Karina Bosu and Robin Wright.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick.
Do you want to, if you walk, do you want to mic up or?
If it's easy. Do we need that?
Depends if you walk around. Do you wander?
I wanted to walk around.
That's probably best if we mic you up.
Okay. I think I can talk loud enough.
We're recording, so if you can wear the microphone, that would be fantastic.
Oh, sorry, tangled. So this one goes here. Is it right?
Yep.
Oh, this is so cool.
Great.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick.
Let's move that onto the slideshow.
I can't see the mouse.
Yeah. It's very hard.
Because of the glare. It's disappeared.
What's the shortcut button for slideshows in PowerPoint? Anyone know?
Oh, well.
It was somewhere here.
Sorry.
The glare is making it quite difficult to operate the technology here.
Here.
Never mind. I will proceed.
Uh-huh.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and thank you very much to QUT for providing us with the facilities here today. This is fantastic. We've been doing a bit of a roadshow around Australia, speaking to people about the Open Education Licensing project that we've been doing over the past 2 years. So we have recently been in Sydney and Canberra, and I know a few of you may have already seen our presentation, so I'm sorry if we're repeating ourselves. But we are very keen to make sure that as many people around Australia as possible see what we've done and hopefully get involved with using some of the resources we've created. So Karina and I today will just talk through some of what we've done, and as Nick said, if you want to ask any questions or have any comments, please become involved, because we really would like this to be an interactive session where possible.
Thank you. This is a little summary of our presentation. Some of the things we are going to try to cover today include some concepts of open education, resources and practices. We will introduce the Toolkit project and talk about the rationale why we did it. Some of the research outcomes and the findings, because we did have a survey as well, and demonstrate the Toolkit, and then some key legal issues in the end. But before that, and I guess I can move now. Can you hear me? Is the microphone on? No.
It is? Okay. Yes.
Can you hear me well? Maybe I'll put it closer. I'm assuming that most of you here today know what open educational resources are. So I'm not going to ask you what do you think they are. I'm going to make a more personal question. I'm going to ask a more personal question about what does it mean to you. There are several definitions of open educational resources. The first one was established in 2002 by UNESCO. It is about content, but what else? What does it mean to you? Maybe it would be helpful if we know the type of audience we have here today too, because it depends on how you work and what you work with. You see open educational resources differently. So how many educators we have in the room here today? Thank you. Librarians. Excellent. Copyright officers. Wonderful. Who here is actually working in a management position, in an executive position, senior executive? Wonderful. Excellent. So it's a variety of people here, which is brilliant. As an educator, I see open educational resources as a way to provide access to education and additional resources to people who would not have the opportunity to have access to these resources otherwise. Is there any other way you see open educational resources? Nick?
Co-creation.
Co-creation.
Yeah, allowing the people you're working with, the learners you're working with, to participate in education.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes.
People who want an alternative access mode, not based on sort of areas, but people who want to work outside traditional.
Exactly. And they prefer digital, or they prefer video, or they prefer e-bench, or different types of resources as well.
Or something under open license.
Yeah. And something that they know they can use and reuse without, the concern of doing the wrong thing. Any other definitions?
And I think localization, being able to adapt content which is location specific.
Exactly, and translation as well. So a lot of content that openly licensed can be translated into other languages. What else? What about cost? Is it supposed to be free, or should we charge for it? Anyone? Because we are going to talk about business model anyway, so we may as well have the question up front. No? Adrian?
I think that what it does is it gets us, especially in higher education, to actually understand what exactly
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I agree too. Anything else? Anything else? Well, open educational resources, you probably know, are mostly digital, different types of resources that are used for learning for the educational purposes. It can be anything from an image to a video to a full course, modules. It depends on the resource that is available and where it's available. But one important element of OER is that they are openly licensed. That's a very important aspect of OER. So I will continue then talk about this definition here. This is a definition by that was developed by UNESCO during the last big World Congress of OERs in Paris. This is the definition. I'm not going to read in full. This is the definition we used in the project, and we actually asked participants in the survey their opinion about this definition, and some of them have agreed and others not so much, and then they explain why. We are going to then talk about the data that emerged from the survey, and we will cover some of these understandings. But open educational resources is not enough because, like Adrian was saying, content is not everything these days. So when we teach, we use other things. We have other elements that are part of our teaching practices. And it's the same for OER. So yes, we have a whole range and a huge amount of resources available today in several repositories, institutional, and open for everybody, or non-institutional. But resources alone, content alone is not enough for the movement to prosper, for us to have, increased access of an improvement of learning and teaching. Other elements, and this is kind of a metaphor that I created in an umbrella, so I can see open educational practices, which is a different concept, being a broader concept, and having open educational resources as one element. Then we have open policies, as Nic covered today. We have also different and more flexible ways of learning design. We have access to research, open access to research, and open technologies today, too. So these are other elements of open educational practices, which is a broader concept than just open educational resources. But the meaning of open has changed over the years in higher education. Open education is actually not a new term. It has been used for decades. And what we used to know before was open and distance learning. Remember the flexible way of learning, anywhere, anytime. And I guess the key concept of open at that time was that it was institutions like Open University in the UK, and here we have also in Australia, was that there were no prerequisites for entry and alternative and flexible ways, flexible exiting pathways. That was perhaps one of the first linked to open education. Then we saw open access, which was mostly open for view. And now we have open educational resources, which we have already discussed, but there is also, like Nic has put on that spectrum of openness, there are different, different types of openness. And then in 2012, we had the Moocs. We all have heard of them. And there is open in that name too, so it's massive open and online content. But again, the interpretation of the open is not, it can be different by different people. I will pass now to Robin, and she will continue giving you a little bit of more background, and that will be linked to the project. Thank you.
Thanks, Karina. Yes, so in 2012, which was effectively the year of the Mooc in Australia, the University of Tasmania and Swinburne, the copyright officers, started talking to each other. And we said, people need help to negotiate open licenses. There's all these Moocs out there. There's a lot of people putting course material online, but a lot of people aren't very aware of the licensing requirements, and it's very difficult for people to understand how to deal with licensing for Moocs. So we wanted to try and do some research into what people were doing with open educational resources at different universities around Australia, and more importantly, how they were dealing with the copyright and licensing aspects. So this was the beginning of the idea for our project. Thank you, Karina. We were in a situation, as a lot of you know, where educators in Australian universities had traditionally relied on the educational statutory licences. So that is Part 5B and Part 5A in the Copyright Act that we all know so well. I'm sure you're all able to quote Section 135 ZML, which we use constantly. And the complexity of this had made all the copyright officers absolute experts in Part 5A and Part 5B, but not necessarily translated across to understanding what an open licence was and how that interacted with the statutory licences. And for a lot of educators, they just didn't think about it. They didn't have to think about copyright because we had a blanket licence and they were allowed to do stuff, and they asked the librarians what they were allowed to do, and that was fine. But we realised with online education, we were entering an environment where people needed to know more. So how were we going to get that information across was something that we were talking about. As a lot of you are aware, Australia doesn't have a fair use exception. There's recently been a lot of discussion about that because of the Productivity Commission report that was released last year, recommending the introduction of fair use in Australia. But as yet, we don't have such an exception, so that does restrict perhaps what Australian universities can do when putting material online because of the use of third-party content in that material. Again, something people hadn't thought of a lot when we were protected by the blanket statutory licences. So copyright and licensing has really turned to be a critical challenge for the sector because of that, because the sector is used to working in a fairly protected, closed environment. When you go into an open environment on the World Wide Web, we don't have as much expertise on how to operate. And as Karina said, there's been a lot of changes around the meaning of open. As a copyright lawyer, I see it very much as more a legal definition. The openness is what you can do with the material. How open is the license you have? How openly are you allowed to use it, or is someone else allowed to use your material? But then a lot of other questions came up from the technologists, and that is it technically open? What sort of technologies, what sort of medium are you using to present the material, and who can access it, and how can they access it, and what other restrictions are there on people accessing it, such as bandwidth and access to technologies. So we looked at other forms of openness as well. As I said, people needed to understand open licenses. Some of the Creative Commons licenses, as Nick pointed out, are more open than others. And I came across a lot of people who said, oh, this is fine. We'll just use a Creative Commons license on this, whatever we're developing. And I'd say, well, which Creative Commons license? And people were just not sure often. You know, sometimes they didn't know there was more than one, or they didn't understand the terms of the licenses. So when we started talking with the University of Tasmania, who'd done a lot of work with open educational resources, we became very aware that people need to know a bit more about the fact that open means more than just online access. And I think the fact that the two words start with O and it created Moocs made it more confusing. Being online doesn't necessarily mean being open, and being openly available doesn't necessarily mean being reusable. So we started a discussion and talked a lot about the David Wiley's 5 Rs, more than just online access. And I can't remember them: retain, remix, revise, retry. There's one more. Anyway. So, but being able to reuse material and having a license that allows you to reuse the material makes the resources much more flexible. And it means that the collaboration that you talked about earlier is much easier because people know that they can reuse material. They don't have to ring someone and ask permission if they see the license and they understand the license. So that was the aim of with the project when we started with the project. I think most of you know about this, that Australian law is less flexible than in other jurisdictions. Instead of a fair use exception, we have purpose-based fair dealing exceptions and the statutory educational licence that we just discussed. The ALRC and the Productivity Commission have both recommended the introduction of fair use. If that happened in Australia, it would change the environment, but really it's arguable that it wouldn't necessarily change our need to use open licensing, because fair use would allow some uses and allow more flexibility, but we would still want to openly license material to encourage collaboration and to reuse complete resources. So open licenses provide yet another element of flexibility that we still need. So there's still a need to understand the type of open licensing people are using for these resources. There has been an expansion of Moocs. We'll talk about how much when we look at the survey that we did. 7 Australian universities are now members of the international OERU project, where 35 universities around the world are getting together to create an openly available Bachelor of General Studies. And there are 7 Australian universities involved in that. That material is all going to be made openly available under Creative Commons licenses. And that's UNESCO-based, is it?
It's funded by several funding bodies, including UNESCO, Commonwealth of Learning,
Yes.
William and Flora Hewlett Foundation.
Sorry, I don't want to be incorrect about that. Go and have a look at the website for OERU if you're interested. Swinburne is a partner, University of Tasmania is a partner as well.
USQ is a partner, Curtin is a partner.
Yes, I'm sure a number of the universities here are partners. But there's a lot of discussion around business models, so I'm really looking forward to the panel this afternoon talking about the different business models that are evolving around open educational resources. People experimenting with payment options around add-on resources that connect to open educational resources and how that might work in people's business models. But we wanted to look into how much commitment there was to open licensing that allowed reuse of educational materials, and particularly in the segment in Australia, where the higher education sector is working competitively to attract students in many situations. So there are a lot of arguments around, well, if we share our material with other people, how does that affect our business position and our branding? So these are questions that need to be teased out by the sector. In 2014, we did some desktop research. This is fairly old now, and we just looked at the Mooc platforms that were being used by Australian universities. We wanted to find out how people are using were using OER at that time, and all we could do was look and see what they'd placed online. And it was really quite difficult to find. It was often buried very deeply in people's websites. A lot of material was created by individual academics, so it was hard to locate them. But from what we could find, over a quarter of the people didn't seem to have anything that seemed vaguely like a MOOC, and then a lot of other people were using the various developing platforms that were happening at the time. But when we tried to ascertain about how much of that material was openly licensed, this was just our estimate really, because it was pretty hard to find, but from what we could see, over half the material was effectively all rights reserved. But that was just by default, because most of the time no one was putting any license on it at all. A lot of people just hadn't thought about it. It was good enough to get it up there. The platforms weren't dealing with it, although I think edX now has done some work on ability to put open licenses onto the material. But so a lot of the material was online. It was open for people to access, but it really wasn't engaging in the reuse economy in many ways. So this is when we put the project together. We applied to the Office for Learning and Teaching for some funding, and we were very happy to receive a grant in 2014. We started in 2014, yeah. It's gone.
A long time ago.
2-year project, research and development project between Swinburne and the University of Tasmania. Our aim was to examine open educational practice in Australian universities at present and in the future, and to develop some practical information or licensing tools that could be used by the sector. So what we did was, in June 2015, we did a survey. We surveyed 389 staff from 38 Australian universities, and we got a very good response rate. Thank you to all of you who participated. I know a few of you here will have probably filled out the survey. What we did, we asked 3 different categories of individuals from Australian universities, higher education institutions, and they were managers and policymakers, teachers and educational content developers, and thirdly, information professionals such as librarians and copyright officers. So we sent it out to those 3 groups of people, and we asked each of them about the role of open educational practice in their institution at present, and their current and their planned open activities. And we asked about the platforms and the licenses that they were using and that they understood, and also something that I was very interested, the policy and the strategic reasons underlying what was being done in the open area by their sector, and what they knew about the intellectual property issues that arose out of those discussions. So it was really quite exciting to get those responses back, and we're still going through the data. Karina's going to go through some of it in a minute, but it continues to bring up really interesting issues, and we hope to publish some more from it very soon. And also, we put together the responses, and we worked in 2016 on developing our open educational licensing toolkit that we're going to demonstrate today. It's currently operating at our website, oel.edu.au. It is a beta version. Please keep that in mind. We're constantly developing it. If there are any comments or that you'd like to feed back to us, please let us know or email us after today if you've had a look later on. Let's move on.
Thank you, Robin. So yeah, out of that 389 people, we answered the survey. We had our largest representation were the librarians and other information management professionals. So thank you. We also had our second biggest group of stakeholders were the educational or instructional designers. And then the educators and the copyright officers were the second largest group. So we had a good representation of the key stakeholders for the survey. And interestingly, we had 70% of senior executives and some others in the management position, which is very helpful because it's important to know their perspective and how they feel about, policies and strategies for open educational practices. This is an interesting slide because it tries to incorporate different elements of the survey. The first one, it represents a question we ask about how important open educational practices is for the activities you currently run in your university or will run in the future. And the majority of people thought that it was important and very important. Then 70%, I'm just going to the last one now, the 70% said that they're actually currently doing it, working with some form of open educational resources, initiative, or activity. But then the practice there, we observed that's not really linked with the policy of the institution because 43% of the respondents said that their institution have not yet developed or had a conversation about policies related to open educational practices, resources, or any type of open education activity. So that was interesting to see the practices in these institutions were not really well aligned with policy. We go back to Moocs again because, as we said before, in 2012, it was really in fashion. So everybody was talking about Moocs, everybody knew, and they were investing a lot of time, institutions were investing a lot of time and money. They're still, some of the institutions are still doing that, but there is a slightly decrease. So these are data from 2015. So we had 58% saying they were currently working on any activity related to Moocs, but then only 47% said, you know, in future we are planning to do something related to that. Similarly was the activities related to videos and podcasts that also were showing a slightly decrease for future activities. What we found that's probably related to the afternoon discussions today is that, you know, there were future plans. The future plans for open textbooks were actually increasing, which is interesting to see that. We were also interested on the types of learning and teaching resources educators were using that were created by others rather than themselves. And 88%, so a large group, said that they were just using openly licensed material on the internet. And then 65% said they were using scholarly publications, but we don't know if they were open or not. And this is all important for the construction of the toolkit. We will present that later for you today. Other resources then were creating collaboration with their institutions, so groups within the same institutions, groups outside their institutions, government-produced resources, and commercially produced resources, which was interesting to see. Then we were also interested in types of platforms that were mostly used by Australian universities to deliver those educational services and products. And it was a surprise because, I don't know if you remember the slide that Robin has shown, we didn't actually see YouTube there, but in the survey we found out that a large percentage of people were actually using YouTube a lot more than we thought. And the second biggest is iTunes U. And one other large group that I found very interesting is the other, which is normally in the surveys very small, but this one is quite representative. And the other in our survey includes edX, Open edX, sorry, Wiki University, Canvas Network, WordPress, which is very interesting, Equella, and iBook. So I found that interesting. We also were interested to know why were universities in Australia participating in such initiatives. In tapping into this, we can understand and perhaps enhance some of that activities and help or, you know, disseminate. And it's probably not a surprise for us that, you know, a large group of participants believe that, you know, they are doing this to enhance their institution global profile. Attract more students, because that's what we do, isn't it? As universities, we want to attract students, so perhaps open education activities would be a way to leverage students' numbers or increase student number. Innovate and improve the quality of their resources, because by sharing or collaborating, we can have a richer content. Again, a link to that is exploring new pedagogical practices and marketing opportunities. Of course, we can't miss out on that as universities. But what I found interesting, and it's not there, is that the least important were that they were not interested in developing partnership with commercial industry. So in terms of importance, they think the participants thought that they were not very important, and competition from other institutions, providers in higher education in Australia, which I found very interesting, even though we wanted to make sure that we use that for marketing. Some people believe that it wasn't important, or least important, that is for competition, which is kind of not very well aligned.
I had a couple of quick quotes for that slide. Yeah. As part of after we finished the survey, we asked some individual people who completed the survey to undertake more intensive interviews with us, and they were great. And we've got a few really good quotes that I think relate to what we found in some of these things. And one of them about the question of why your university is participating in OER initiatives. One person said, "It's tended to be more of a means to an end and around marketing, creating a channel to get people engaged with the university. But certainly working in a library, there's a fairly strong emphasis on making information as widely available, as freely available as possible." So I thought that was quite indicative. And another one that somebody said, sorry, I didn't print out all the slides when I came, but I thought was quite good. Someone said, "I think there's more value in us releasing this and increasing the profile than worrying about intellectual property." So I thought it was very interesting to ask the question, why? And you get quite different response, which shows it's a really developing area. Thanks, Karina.
No, thanks. And that is a good lead to the following slide, because we ask specific questions about intellectual property, and this one in particular is about, what are the issues, what intellectual property issues considered by universities when deciding whether or not to participate in open education initiatives. And the primary concern were the complexity of the copyright and licensing, which Robin has already mentioned about it, that people are not aware of the licenses and copyright issues. Again, the ownership of material on the internet, understanding of open licenses, and risk. So they were concerned about doing the wrong thing, really. And that, of course, is understandable. When you don't understand what you are doing, you are afraid of, be adventurous, be innovative.
I had another quote about that one too. One of the quotes said, "I think the issue is that people like the idea, but openness is it's quite complicated and it's not that straightforward. And people like to say open, and what they mean by that, everyone has a slightly different definition. And obviously there's a spectrum of how you can talk about openness. But if you've got an object that's online that's inaccessible, that it's not particularly open, even if it's free." So people are really playing with the ideas and thinking about what they mean when they're saying we're making things openly available.
It appears to have really a gap between, what we have available and what people understand of those, of that facilities and regulations, licenses, opportunities. And that's why this is so important. It was important for us, it still is, but for the toolkit in particular, because then it informs how important and how useful the toolkit can be for educators and others working in this area. So then we also ask about the perceptions of copyright ownership at universities, and we were very surprised to find, that a small number, really, 48% thought that the university was the primary holder of copyright of their material. And Rob and I were discussing yesterday, and basically 90% of the institutions in Australia are the copyright holder of what we do.
I don't know if it's 90%, but obviously a large number of
a large amount. So it shows again a lack of understanding by educators and some other practitioners that about what they can do and what they can't in terms of content. Some of the overall findings here is that there is still concern about the complexity of the licenses, open that the word open doesn't always, the concept doesn't always allow reuse. It depends on how you use and for what. If your copyright is too difficult, resources won't be developed or disseminated or open. And policies are still to be developed. So again, that shows the missing link between practice and policy there. What is interesting also from these findings is that another research conducted some time ago in Australia, also funded by OLT, found similar issues. So this project was between 2010 and 2012, so maybe the survey was around 2011. So data from 2011 and data from 2015 were actually still very similar. So it's very interesting to see that even though open education resources and practice have evolved globally and in other places, and people are really engaging, institutions engaging and take advantage of this movement. In Australia, we seem to still be very slow in taking that on board. So, and be a little bit more risky or innovative. That's very interesting.
I had a nice quote about that. One of the interviewees said, so if you don't feel absolutely confident with the licensing and how it's stated, you're just not going to do it. I think you'd think, what's the risk for me here and what's the benefit? That was really quite a prescient comment.
It could be that we just don't have a very good understanding of the issues of our license and what we can do as educators or practitioners, and that's why, we are just not there yet compared with other places in the world. We will probably talk more about open education more broadly and globally in the afternoon, but there are some amazing initiatives happening around the world and people taking really advantage in a positive way of open educational practices. Yeah. I will pass back to Robin. She will talk about the toolkit.
Finally.
Thank you, Karina. Yes, it's taken a while to get here, but for those of you who are interested in having a look at our toolkit, it is available through our website, which is www.oel.edu.au. The website began as our project website, so it started having information about our research project, but it has morphed over time and it's now the home of the toolkit. But also we started developing a few resources, and if you go along the top menu bar, you can see the first link is to the toolkit. We'll look at that in a moment. There is also a link here to some resources that we have developed during the project. Oh, why did that happen? Because I haven't gone out of it. Sorry, my fault. I'll just go back into the... There we are. Sorry, just have to go onto the web. Use the live one instead of the PowerPoint slide, Robin. Okay, this is the live site. And you can see toolkit access at the top and then the resources there. And if we have a good connection. We have done a number of case studies. We're very kindly provided with information from, I think there were 7 universities who are already doing some work in the open educational sphere. And they have given us information about their current situation as at around the end of last year. Charles Sturt, QUT, University of Canberra, the University of Southern Queensland, which has been very active in the area, and our 2 universities. So we tried to put together some information that would help people understand just what other universities were doing. But it's a very fast-moving area, and I'm sure it's moved on from there even since we did that. And also, as part of the resources, we developed a bit of an infographic around what we called the continuum of openness, which you can see here, where it was similar to the slide that Nick put up earlier in relation to the difference between what makes something open as possible, and what makes it more closed for people to access. And we felt there were 3 elements that needed to be considered. The legal element, which of course we've been talking about mainly because that's to do with licensing. It's most open if your material is available in the public domain, not protected by copyright. Then there is a series of different
Creative Commons or other licenses that you can use that become more and more restrictive for various reasons. Then you have individual commercial licenses, which may restrict access behind firewalls, and then copyright, all rights reserved. And in some situations, there are licenses that may attempt to exclude exceptions in the Copyright Act. So that is perhaps the most closed you can get. So a lot of people can look at what they're doing with the licensing of their material and say, well, where do we sit? How open are we making something and why? But also there are elements around their technical accessibility, their technical openness and their accessibility openness. So the most open technically is obviously your material is remix enabled. It's downloadable. So a lot of the commercial platforms don't allow you to download content. They'll only allow you to use the content on their platform, for example. So you can't download it and reuse it. So to make it more open, you need to make it available in an open format and use standards and APIs that can be used by other parties. Are editing tools available? It's all very well to be able to download it, but if you can't edit it, then how much use is it when it comes to collaboration? If access is only available through the platform, if it's only read-only, if registration is required before you can access material, there are all these elements that make it more and more closed, potentially for different users, depending on where they are and what their aims are. And then if it's behind a firewall or is restricted by technological protection measures or in some ways digital rights management information, that has an impact on its usability as well. And in relation to accessibility, the same applies. Is it searchable? Is your metadata, does it make it searchable? Is it on open platforms? Does it enable text and data mining? So is the content you're using accessible? Are the users tracked in any way? Do you use restrictive formats that can't be reused like PDF? Are there high bandwidth requirements? In some countries, that is going to restrict the access to some people. If you're using a lot of video, it might be more difficult in some countries to access it. Is it geo-blocked? A lot of commercial material, of course, is geo-blocked, or is it only available for subscription access? So I think it's really useful for people to think about where they fit on this continuum and how open the material they're dealing with really is. So we put that together as when we were thinking about these things at the beginning of the project. And so that's available now as a PDF to download or on our website if people want to use it just to discuss the business models they're dealing with. But anyway, so to go back to the toolkit itself, this is what we're here to demonstrate today. So we'll just take you through the toolkit, but of course you can play with it yourself. It's openly available on the web. Through this link, just click on Toolkit. And you will, of course, get acceptance of terms before you go into the toolkit. This ensures that people understand that this is seen as guidance. It's definitely not seen as legal advice. This, in many cases, what we provide just links off to other people's, a lot of Creative Commons licenses, platform licenses. So a lot of the material that you access through our toolkit is not under our control in any way. So these terms of use make that clear to users. So you do need to accept those before you go in. You click on I agree, and then it allows you to continue. When you first go into the toolkit, we provide a number of tips, and the developers seem to be increasing them by the day. When I went in last night, there were more than when I'd been in the day before. But there are just a little tips about various uses of the website that you can scroll through, talking about how to use it. But you don't have to if you don't want to. So we'll skip the tips for the moment. So this is the opening page, effectively, of the toolkit. What the toolkit is it's just a decision tree. It's a decision tree that anyone can use to step through what they're trying to do with open educational resources and provide them with information about the licensing and copyright issues that might affect that use. So the first question you get asked is, what stage are you at with your OER? Are you trying to just find a resource? Are you trying to use or modify a particular resource? Pardon me. Are you making a resource? You're making your own OER. Are you sharing it, an existing one, with someone else? Or we added reviewing a resource because we understood that people might be thinking about ways to review whether their open strategy was working. But the three middle ones are the ones that we'll deal with mainly, because those are the ones that the decision tree is more structured around. It's around actually using a resource. So if you choose, for example, if you have a resource that you've found, an image, for example, you've found on the internet, you think, great, this would be great, I would love to use this and incorporate it into one of my open online resources. What do I do? So you click using or modifying the resource. At each stage in the decision tree, when you answer a question, the pathway brings up a summary of that answer on the right-hand side of the screen, and that expands as you go through using the toolkit. And that just shows the questions you've asked and gives you an idea of where you're up to in your decision tree. And if you change your mind, you can go back. So we move on to the next question. Next question is, will you use the resource only for your personal research or study purposes? The copyright officers in the room will identify that would place you on a different stream of the question tree. So say, in this case, no, because we want to put it up online and we want to make it openly available to the whole world as part of our Mooc, or Open Educational Resource. So no, I wish to use the resource for purposes other than research and personal research and study. And you can see that comes up on the right-hand side on the pathway. And then you ask, are you using it as part of your employment? Well, I work at Swinburne, so I say, yes, I am. And then I move on. And at this point, it asks me which Australian university you're working at. And the reason we've done this is we wanted to put a direct link through to the intellectual property policies for each of the universities, because often people aren't aware, even of their own intellectual property policy, and if they are, they're not quite sure where to find it. So we just wanted to put a direct link through. You can choose up to 3 universities if you work for more than one. So, for example, I can say I work for Swinburne and the University of Tasmania, QUT, yes. I don't know where it is, there we go, QUT. So there we go, I work for 3 different universities. And up on the right-hand side, you'll see the question that's come up, employer, QUT, Sweden and UTAS, Swinburne. And also on the pathway, as you go, occasionally you'll see the little G comes up, and those are guidance snippets. And you can view them at any time, or they will be put together in the guidance you receive at the end. So move on to the next question. It says, is the resource you wish to use already licensed? Now, in many cases, people won't know. But there are obviously a lot of materials made available on the web. So if I say, okay, yes, this image that I chose happens to be licensed under a Creative Commons license, because that's great, it means I can use it. So I say yes. And then it says, which of the following licenses has been applied to the resource? And you will see we don't restrict ourselves just to Creative Commons licenses. There are other open licenses that people have used. They're perhaps not as well known, but a lot of people use licenses such as the free document license. There used to be a free for education license, the free art license. So people may be using other licenses, or may be concerned about the interaction with the educational statutory licenses, Part 5B and Part 5A. The other thing is, when you come to this point, if the name of the license is underlined, if you roll over it, you'll get more information about that particular license from our glossary. And there's a background glossary underlying the database that comes up for each of those different licenses. I might just say to anyone who participated in any of our workshops for the putting together the toolkit, we started out with a plain language description, similar to the license chooser that Creative Commons themselves has, where we tried to say, I'm happy for anyone to use it as long as they just credit me, or I'm happy for anyone to use it but not for commercial purposes. And we found that just confused people. Most people do know a lot about the Creative Commons licenses. They do know they exist, and they went in wanting to just say, yes, that's the one I'm using. So we actually took a step back in the development process and actually included the names of the license, because we saw that people were quite cluey about it and really didn't need that much hand-holding. So, for example, if I say, okay, well, the image I've chosen is licensed under CC BY ND. So I click on that license. it comes up on the right-hand line, and we're getting more and more of the guidance snippets appearing on the pathway. I keep going, and then it says, will you change the resource? And I say, well, yes, because I want to edit it in some way. And then I move on, and I say, what do you want to do? Do you want to embed it into a web page or not? Do you need to make a copy? Well, because I'm going to change it, I'm going to do it in, I don't know, PowerPoint or something. No, what's that? The picture editing software. I say, no, I'm going to make a copy. And then I move on. And then it says, where do you want to make it available? And sometimes people are not yet sure. So for here, I'll say, okay, I'm going to put it onto YouTube, for example. And this says, okay, you've come to the end. If you click here, you're going to get what we call a guidance summary. And the guidance summary comes up, and this is basically a summary of all the answers to all the questions you've asked in the right-hand pathway. And this summary is downloadable as a PDF, and you can print out a copy or email it. And if you press print copy, it will bring up a PDF version. Show all downloads. Sorry. Just opening the reader. So that's what the summary, the guidance summary looks like when you see it in a PDF version. It tells you the date that it's generated, the content came out of the OEL Toolkit, some disclaimer information, and then it gives you details of your pathway. These were the questions you asked and the answers you gave, and then a summary of the guidance provided about all the information that you provided in the decision tree. And you can print that out, or you can email it, and you can take it to your copyright officer if you wish and say, this is what I've done, give me some more information about where I'm at. But if you just view it on the website, you'll see that you can open each of the guidance snippets under the different areas: license compatibility, making it available, the media you're going to use, the policy and governance around what you've chosen. And in this situation, I got 3 links to the intellectual property policies of QUT, Swinburne and UTAS, because I chose the 3 universities. And then some general information. In this point, I get a guidance snippet that says you cannot use the no derivative license. And if I open that one, it will explain why. It says you'll not be able to change a resource if it was released under a no derivatives license. So as I went through the decision tree, I said, yes, it's already licensed. It's licensed under a CC license with a no derivatives element, but I said I wanted to change it. So this is a warning. It's saying to me, remember, you can't change that because that's the license that you've chosen. So this is just giving people information about what they're trying to do. And if you decide to go back, you say, oh, look, actually, that wasn't what I wanted. I've put too many universities in there. I'll start over. It'll warn you you're going to lose all of your existing answers. You say, oh, no, actually, I really like that. I'll keep that for the moment. And while you're there, you can go up to each individual answer and see why that question was relevant, what you needed to know at that point. So it's really just another way of people accessing the information they need to create open educational resources. So I think I'll probably stop there. It's quite complicated, and if I do too many steps, I think it becomes very confusing for people in the audience. But I encourage you to go and try it out yourself. As I said, please keep in mind we're still developing it. I've got a whole pile of work back home because we're still changing some of the wording. As people use it, issues come up, and it's a bit of an evolving resource. It's still officially in beta. But if you've got any comments or you find any hiccups or bugs, please let us know. And now, I think I hand back to Karina. Is that right? Oh no, there's more. This is the one. Yeah, that one.
The legal thing.
Yes. I won't talk too much about the development process, but just briefly, I will say that
what we are developing now, the University of Tasmania is doing a little bit of ongoing development of the toolkit, and they're working on an administration interface which will be openly available, which will mean that we'll be able to authorise other people to go in and make changes to the toolkit if they wish to change something that relates to their own organisation, or they wish to change it for other purposes. We'll be able to authorise them to do that from an interface that they're developing.
Including the updates, the links and other resources, because we are always changing websites and restructuring things. So I think it's important to have that option. We have also committed to the funding body that we would have a 5-year maintenance of the resources. So this is part of that commitment.
Yes, and then I just wanted to talk about a couple of issues that come up. These are legal issues that have driven particular questions that we asked during the toolkit that you saw as we stepped through it before. So the first one is that question about, are you only using it for your own personal research and study? That's a reflection of the Australian copyright law. As I said, we have a fair dealing exception that allows people to use material for their own personal research and study, and they should be reminded of that. But in most cases, they probably will be clicking no, but we really structured it around how the copyright law works at the moment. If the law should change, we were going to have to rewrite this part of the website, and particularly obviously the fair dealing and the educational statutory licences, which there is a potential for some change. We will be probably then taking the website down and doing a small rewrite, but we have a contingency plan. We believe we can weather that should it occur. The other issue was the employee issue. As I said, we wanted to give easy links through to the intellectual property policies of the different universities. When we launched this toolkit at Ascalite in November, we, for some reason, chose Deakin University when we did our summary, and it came up with 404 error. And I was so annoyed, our first demonstration of the toolkit, and there was someone from Deakin in the audience, and they said, oh, well, we've just redone our website yesterday or something. So this is going to happen. We're going to get broken links and things all the time. So that's why with the administration interface, hopefully people will keep us up to date when they change their policies. And a lot of people are looking at open access policies. If anyone introduces one at their university, please let us know, because we will add the link. Effectively, when you go through and you choose a university, you get a plain language snippet of information that says something along the lines of, most universities would claim copyright ownership in teaching material created by their staff. And then in 2 or 3 situations it says, but this university has a separate open educational policy and here's a link to it. So we would love to add more. I think the licence is fairly clear. As I said, we have information about each of the licences, and it's all available in the glossary, but we link directly out to Creative Commons. So hopefully that will remain authoritative. This issue about linking or making a copy, you might remember that picture is different now. I've been nagging the developers for some time, and they finally did what I asked. Instead of just saying no to that question of, will you embed the resource into a web page or make a link to the resource, it just said no. I said, no, you have to make it clear to people what you mean by no. If you're not linking and you are dealing with it, you must be making a copy. So from a copyright law point of view, that's different. As you all know, the copyright officers, if you just link or embed a resource, you're not undertaking a copyright act. But if you make a copy, you are. So at that point, we ask the users to make that decision. This one about linking to the platforms, along with the universities, we've also tried to put in links to all the terms and conditions of the different platforms. So if you wanted to find out the terms and conditions for edX or Coursera that govern the use of the material that you place onto that platform, often that's difficult to find if you're just searching their website. So we tried to make a link to those terms and conditions where we could. And I think I've talked about that. Yes, we wanted to put in points where there might be conflicts between what you wanted to do and the license that you've chosen. So that's what I said earlier when I did the demonstration. If your image is available under a no derivatives license but you want to change it, we advise you, we'd say in the guidance, be aware the license you've chosen doesn't allow you to do the act that you're trying to do. And we wanted to make sure that we included information about moral rights. I do find a lot of people who use material in the education sector are sort of under the impression that if you just give a credit for everything, then that's fine. You don't have to worry about licenses. So we wanted to make it clear that moral rights also exist, and you have to be sure that you attribute the author for any material that you're using. And then we wanted to make one more announcement. Karina can do this.
So within this field of research, which is already open education resources and practices, it's a very new, fairly new, but it is. We do have organizations, and we'll talk more in the afternoon. Organizations and groups of people dealing with or getting together to celebrate open education and leverage and take advantage of these opportunities. So one of them is the Open Education Consortium. Some of you might be familiar and others won't. So they normally run a conference every year, and this year will be in South Africa, in Cape Town. So I'll be there to present. But the most important element of this is that we are actually going to receive an international award for the Toolkit. So there are several categories of awards there, and one of them is Open 2, and the Toolkit will actually, as I said, be awarded, and I'll have the pleasure to represent my team and receive the award, which is great. So we are very excited.
We're very excited to be in the company of this.
We had 2 and a bit of years, working on the Toolkit and the project itself. So we feel that it's, all paid off.
And it's great because we'll get some international dissemination of the Toolkit. It is available under an open license, and the software is available under an open software license. So we're really hoping that it may be picked up and used by other people as well in the future.
Including the presentation, so.
Yes. So thank you very much. And does anyone have any questions before we move on to further parts of today?
We have time.
Hello, Tom.
It's more a comment. Firstly, congratulations on the whole thing.
Thank you.
Congratulations on getting the money out of learning and teaching and doing such great work. And it's work that really does understand the layers of complexity that practitioners within universities have to deal with. Doing things which sometimes come down to a lot by saying just do it. At first blush, done a kind of template will arise in the event of
Thank you, Tom. That's a really good point. And yeah, Tom was asking about the proposed changes to the legislation, and I think that's we've really thought about that in the Toolkit as well. And we would hope that if there is a change in the legislation, that the sector can work with us to amend the Toolkit as it is to still provide benefit in the new environment. But thank you.
And having the Toolkit as open source software helps too, because if we can't do it, it will be open for everyone who have the technical or the information to do that. So it's.
And we hope it'll have a good ongoing life.
Yes.
So thanks. Yes. Yeah, that was really interesting. I had a comment. I'm still going through the interviews, but I can't remember. But one of the interviewees said, "Oh yes, we were told just put X subject 101. Just grab all the PDFs and stick them up online." And then they said, "Oh, we didn't do that."
Mm.
Yeah.
And the fact that the research shows that people need more information, because they wanted to share, educators and other practitioners, they wanted to share, they just don't know how, and they're afraid that what they are doing is wrong. So having this tool as a way to provide information and guidance to people might be a way to bridge the gap between practice and understanding, and that we will do more of that in Australia. Yeah.
Yes.
Narrative freedom, that's copyright.
Thank you.
Congratulations. I guess if we're looking at the birthing process and your parenthood of it now, I'd like to touch on comments, which started with a question. Whether we adopt or whether we just co-parent, I guess the power in it might be certainly sticking with one child put input in, and I guess that was my question really. Are you asking for institutions?
We haven't really discussed that as a team, but I think at the moment we aren't specifically asking for individual contributions because the project's winding up. We don't have that sort of structural facility. But that was the idea of doing the administrative interface, that if in the future it wasn't able to be maintained by one central body, then it could be taken out and maintained by others. But I think if it's seen as valuable over the next period of time by the whole sector, we should be able to work together, because we had such fantastic participation in the development workshops. If we can continue that with the administration interface, and as people tell us how they're using it, hopefully that will bring what people want. It'll develop in the way users need. I think we'll have to wait and see. Yes, Nick? Yeah.
That's such a really fantastic resource. I'm wondering, the disclaimer at the front says it's obviously not legal advice and shouldn't be relied upon. To what extent are institutions relying upon this? And I guess the question I have is, what would it take to embed this into the approval policies of the formal approval policies of institutions, so that we can drastically reduce the support costs of dealing with requests for an educational license? Do you see many problems with embedding this within the approval process, so that that sort of checklist format, if everything is done according to the toolkit, that it would be fairly easy to sign off on licensing and release decisions?
That's an interesting question. I'm not
There
sure.
was a time where we were actually saying, because it's open license and people can go and change the structure, hopefully with this version that our colleagues are working on, people might be able to change the structure and the content. Universities, if they want, it would depend on the commitment of each university, the policies they have related to open educational practices and resources. But institutions can tailor that to their own needs. So it will be a decision tree the universities could actually take on board and make that part of their practices, open educational practices package.
There is an issue about the flexibility, though. I think it's very open, it's very changeable. If you're going to embed something in a policy, it could change faster than the policy changes, and therefore, from an authorisation point of view, it might not work. And we've never really seen it as such as an authorisation product, as more the information, the guidance. But I think it would still fit somewhere, but maybe not like a checklist. I think as it develops, people will work out, perhaps, as you said, how they use it. And if someone took one aside and developed their own and said, this absolutely is set in stone, and if you use this, you're fine, yeah, it could work. Maybe. I think we need to work more with the copyright officers and people about how they want to use it. Yes,
I guess that sort of leads into my question
a lot of them came to our workshops. There was a lot of interest from developers, and a lot of them because they were saying, copyright's so scary, it's so difficult, it's so complicated. It never occurred to me I would be able to find a way through it. And we were saying, we think you can. You know, we think we can provide something that normal people can use. So I think it's quite attractive to developers. And in one of the workshops, I had a manager who came up and saw me afterwards and said, I'm so excited, I want to take this straight back to my team of developers and show it to all of them. So we really hope so. But again, our main contacts are through the copyright officers, so we push it as much as we can. And if you guys can help us promote it, that would be great.
We have time? What's the time?
Well, it's 11:15, so if our discussion is slowed to a halt, I'll hand it back to Nic.
Nic, can I just make a little comment about your question, Jessica, in terms of how do we help educators, developers that deal with educators engage with open educational resources. I agree definitely with Robin that the toolkit is an instrument that can help to inform them about the licenses and the issues we have to look at, but also make sure that they understand the whole concept of open educational resources, free content. It's not only the license, but the practice as well, what they can do with it, where they are, and it's like really build the capacity and understanding around those issues, because educators have a lot of fear of exposing themselves by sharing the content. So even concepts like that can be worked out, and you know, just to let them know it's gonna be okay. Things like that, because they are really, but again, goes back to lack of information, understand that through capacity building, these issues can be addressed. Thanks, sorry about that.
Well, thank you so much for a really fascinating overview of what I'm sure will be a really incredibly useful resource. Please join me in thanking Karina and Robin for that.